Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and it's time for another market update where we look at all sorts of things. Just an update, the FMCSA did end up releasing all the data that magically disappeared and said that this was some technical glitch. So everything is up to date. We're going to look at authorities, at ELP violations. We're going to look at the rate per mile, what the best and worst states are for the three different equipment types, diesel prices, and basically figure out how the market has changed week over week. Ready? Let's go. As always, all the charts are going to be attached right here, so let's take a look at a general overview first. In terms of load postings, week over week, they're up almost 15%, month over month down 13%, year over year up 20%. Capacity postings, how many trucks are posted on the load boards? Week over week, up 17%, but month over month and year over year, they're down. So month over month, down 2% almost, and year over year, a little over 30%. Diesel prices week over week are down almost half a percentage point, month over month down 0.7%, but year over year, they're still up 2.05%. We'll get into diesel prices in more detail in just a moment. All right, let's take a look at what's happening with the net change in carrier authorities. I found this a little bit funny because the net change is plus one carrier. Basically, the same amount of carriers left this week as came in. If you want to see a more detailed chart, here it is. You can see in the red the total gained, you can see in the green the total lost, and in the orange the net change. So the total gained and total lost were pretty much the same. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening with those ELP out of service orders so far in September. This is up to September 14th. Of course, they are lower than in August, but then again, this is up to September 14th. This is only half of the month. ELP out of service orders in pink are, they are not quite at the same level as the violations, which means that it's not enforced 100%, unfortunately. So let's take a look at the details. As you can see, in blue is the violations and pink is the out of service orders. This does not include border zone carriers because they are not subject to get an out of service order for an ELP violation. If we want to take a look at the percentage correlation, yeah, it's down from last week. It's actually now at 79.29%. So if you get an ELP violation, it looks like you have pretty much a 20% chance of not getting an out of service order, which is why a lot of folks are saying, hey, it is not getting enforced the way it should be. Let's take a look at the heat map for ELP violation. It started last week that there is not a single state that does not enforce ELP. As you can see, there are no gray areas. Everyone enforces ELP. Texas enforces the most. New Mexico, just if you're curious, is at 35 now, and Florida is at 107. All right, let's move on from ELP and take a look at diesel prices. So currently diesel prices are at $3.68 per gallon, national average. That's 1.7 cents lower than last week, 2.6 cents lower than last month, but 7.4 cents higher than last year. Now, in terms of the diesel map, this is the diesel price at the pump. As always, California is the most expensive at an average of $5.17 per gallon. Second most expensive is Washington, $5.07, and then Oregon at $4.49. It looks like Texas is the cheapest at $3.21 per gallon. Now, if we remove IFTA from the equation, we can see that the map changes slightly, and Oregon and Washington are actually on the same level, $4.49 per gallon. The reason Oregon is so expensive here is, again, because Oregon does not have an IFTA tax. All right, let's take a look at what's happening with rates over time. I decided to simplify this map and not bombard you with really useless information. So what is going on with the rate per mile? Well, we can see that All three equipment types week over week went down. Reefers are currently at $2.42 per mile on average. Flatbeds at $2.27 have been decreasing for months now, and dry vans are at $1.89 at the moment. Now, also, let's take a look at kind of an overview of what is happening with reefers, flatbeds, and dry vans. We're going to start with dry vans here. The highest rate per mile is coming from Pennsylvania, $3.54 on average. This is data I get from Truckstop. I literally go through the load board and calculate the average rate out of each state to each region. The lowest rate per mile for dry vans comes out of Washington, $1.18. Highest volume is from Texas, 2,462 loads. Lowest volume is Vermont, 26 loads. And the most versatile state is Texas, meaning that there are a lot of loads and also they go everywhere to all regions, right? So you have choice. For reefers, highest rate per mile is Vermont, $7.15, but we'll take a look at what's going on with the East Coast. Lowest rate per mile is Florida and Oklahoma. They're both at $1.72. Texas has the highest volume at 1,043 loads. Rhode Island has the lowest volume at only 5 loads. And the most versatile state this week, when I checked, was actually New Jersey in terms of the amount of loads and also where they go. They were going everywhere. New Jersey doesn't have the most loads, by far not the most loads, but it's the most versatile. There's more choice this week. Flatbeds. Pennsylvania has the highest rate per mile, and we'll take a look at why. $3.97 on average. Doesn't mean that Pennsylvania is all that great. And again, you'll see what I'm talking about. Colorado has the lowest rate per mile on average, $1.18. Alabama has the most loads, 3,626. The lowest is Rhode Island, only 20 loads. And the most versatile state right now is Alabama for flatbeds as of this week. All right, now let's take a look at more detailed data, starting with reefers, loads, and trucks. This is the load map. You can see that Texas has the most loads, followed by actually New Jersey, and then California and Pennsylvania, which is very, very interesting. I noticed that the amount of loads for reefers decreased quite significantly on the load board, at least those that had a posted rate per mile. Now, in terms of trucks, most trucks go to Texas, followed by Florida. Let's take a look at the rate per mile map. Again, you will notice that there's a lot of gray area: Nevada, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, right? Some of the Northeast. This is because there were no rates posted for loads. There was nothing to average out. And currently the highest rate per mile is from Vermont, $7.15, like I said before, for reefers. But that's because there was just 1 or 2 loads going to the Northeast for $7.15 on average. So be careful with this rate per mile map, play around with it, take a look at where these loads go. For example, if we take Texas, you can see loads go pretty much everywhere except for the West Coast. The average rate per mile is $2.22, but the highest rate per mile goes usually to the Plain States for an average of $2.66 per mile. All right, let's take a look at what is going on with reefers in terms of to and from. The highest average rate per mile comes from the southern states, $2.83. The volume, however, is really not there in comparison to other regions. But from the southern states, the highest rate per mile will go to the southern states, $2.92. The lowest rate per mile will go to the northeastern states. Now, the most interesting thing when trying to figure out which region do you have to stay in is take a look at the highest and lowest rate per mile. For example, the Midwest, the highest is from the Midwest to the Midwest, right? And it's also a place which has the highest load volume for reefers. And the lowest rate per mile is still over $2.41. So yeah, when making a decision, just take a look at all the data, not just the highest rate per mile. Next, let's take a look at what is happening with those dry vans. So in terms of loads, most loads, of course, come out of Texas, followed by California. Where do trucks go? They go to Texas, California, Illinois, and Florida. This is where most of the capacity ends up when we're talking about dry vans. In terms of the rate per mile map, of course, right away, what sticks out is Pennsylvania, $3.54 per mile on average. This is because it is skewed by loads that go from northeast to northeast. You see $5.09 per mile on average. If you want to go to the south, it's $2.44. Partially, this happened because of the new rules in Florida, right, with those checkpoints. So that increased the rate per mile. And then we have some of the Midwest that pays $3.10. However, just be careful with that because the Midwest is pretty close. It depends on where in Pennsylvania you are. But if you're like in Pittsburgh and you're going to, I don't know, Columbus, Ohio, the gross might not be there, but the rate per mile will be. All right, let's take a look at an overview of those dry vans. So it looks like the highest rate per mile comes from the Midwest. This is also the region which has the highest load volume. And from Midwest to Midwest, it pays around $3.12 on average. However, if you go to the West Coast, it's $1.34. And what you will notice is pretty much from every region, except for the Western region, the lowest rate per mile is going to the West Coast. Finally, let's take a look at those flatbeds. As I said before, most loads come out of Alabama, followed by, it looks like Mississippi. Actually, not even Texas, which is very surprising. But trucks mostly go to Texas. As you can see, it is a very, very bright spot on the map. In terms of the rate per mile map, so you can see there are a few dark areas, which means higher rate per mile. Pennsylvania, a little bit more versatility. And you can see that to the southern states, which includes Florida, it's also high. And again, this has to do with the new checkpoints in Florida. Regardless of whether it is actually enforced, the idea of it makes people nervous. A lot of people nervous to go there, right? So the rate per mile goes up. Iowa is interesting. Yeah, of course, the rate per mile on average is $3.75. However, this only goes to the Midwest, which is very, very short miles, so the gross isn't there. So let's take a look at the flatbed overview, and we can see that most loads come out of the south for flatbeds, over 70, almost 18,000 loads from the south. And it happens to be that this is the place which has the lowest RPM, meaning that if we look at the lowest RPM, southern states still pay over $2 per mile to western states. That, however, doesn't mean that on average this is the highest rate per mile you will find. Actually, if we just look at an average rate per mile from a region, the highest is from the Midwest, $2.73, with the highest paying loads going to the Midwest at $3.05. But again, short miles, the gross is just not going to be there. I'm curious to hear about your experiences in the market this week. Of course, the market is all over the place right now, not just because we have been in kind of a ditch for the past almost 4 years now, but also because of the recent holiday, right? Labor Day. So I'm very, very curious to hear what your experience has been. Have you managed to find those areas that help you maintain a higher rate per mile and a good gross, or are you still just going to areas and hoping for the best once you get there? Anyway, guys, wishing you all a fantastic rest of your week and weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.